Hi, my name is Bradley Jackman, and today I will be sharing with you my senior project based on a cost analysis of relocating to the Central Coast. I'll begin my presentation with a brief background of why this project was chosen, followed by the objectives that I hope to accomplish. Next, I'll explain the methods that were used to accomplish these objectives, followed by the results of the project, and then I'll finish with a brief summary and some thoughts for future experimentation. Every year, Cal Poly hires a number of new employees. When relocating to the Central Coast, these people have the choice of living in a number of towns, each within commuting distance to Cal Poly. Due to variable demand for housing in each of these areas, each of these towns has a vastly different average housing cost, as well as different commuting distances. These two factors will be the primary focus used to quantify the cost of living in each area. Despite being an obvious consideration, data on the average dollar amount of housing is not readily available. However, the housing cost index of each town, relative to the standard national housing index, can be used to calculate the average cost of housing in each of the towns that were studied. Besides the obvious consideration of housing, the cost of commuting from each area is often overlooked or underestimated. Most people calculate the cost of commuting by accounting only for the price of gasoline. In reality, there are several other factors that determine the cost of driving a vehicle. Each year, AAA releases an estimate of the cost of operating a vehicle per mile. This value can be used to formulate a strong estimate of commuting costs. Using this value, in addition to the average housing costs, the total cost of housing can be calculated with a reasonable level of accuracy. The primary objective of my senior project is to develop a program that helps newly hired Cal Poly employees make informed decisions about where they will live. While housing is less expensive outside of SLO, there is a point where the cost of commuting actually negates the savings. It aims to confirm the hypothesis that deciding where to live based on the cost of housing alone is not always the most cost-effective choice. In addition, this project aims to prove that there are certain situations where living in San Luis Obispo is less expensive as well as more convenient than living elsewhere. The cities I focused on were San Luis Obispo, Pismo Beach, Grover Beach, Arroyo Grande, Paso Robles, Atascadero, and Morro Bay. To accomplish my objective, the following steps were taken. First, I created a Pareto chart to help determine the costs that vary most from one city to another. I considered the cost of buying goods, such as groceries, as well as local taxes, healthcare, and childcare. As mentioned above, the cost of living and the cost of commuting were, by a large margin, the most influential factors. The next step was to develop formulations to calculate the cost of living and the cost of commuting and determine the variables that would be needed. Next, I designed and programmed a user-friendly interface where users can input data and view the resulting calculated average costs of living in one area versus another. Finally, I simulated a variety of scenarios with the program to confirm my stated hypothesis. In order to calculate the total cost of living in each area, the following variables were needed. The variables that vary from one city to the next are the housing cost index and the round-trip distance to Cal Poly. Each town in San Luis Obispo County has a higher housing cost index than the standard housing cost index of 100, meaning that each of these towns is more expensive than the national average. Pismo Beach, for example, with a housing cost index of 216 is, on average, 2.16 times more expensive than the national average housing cost of $965. To calculate the cost of commuting, I use AAA's estimated cost of operating a vehicle per mile, which varies depending on the type of car being driven. These costs range from a minimum of 46 cents per mile for a small sedan, up to 77 cents per mile in an SUV. These estimates take into account factors such as insurance, registration, car maintenance, taxes, and depreciation. When using the cost estimation program, users are asked to input three variables. One is the city being analyzed, two is the type of vehicle being driven, and three is the number of round-trip commutes per week. The total monthly cost of housing is equal to the monthly housing cost added to the monthly commute cost. The monthly commute cost is equal to the cost of driving a vehicle per mile times the round-trip distance to and from Cal Poly. The weekly commute cost is the daily commute cost times the number of commutes made per week, and the monthly commute cost is equal to the weekly commute cost times the number of weeks in a month. In this case, we'll use 4. The monthly housing cost is found by first calculating the expense of housing in an area relative to the national average housing cost. We'll call this the city multiplication factor. The city multiplication factor is found by dividing a city's cost of housing index by the national cost of housing index, which is equal to 100. The result is then multiplied by the national average cost of housing to give the average housing cost in that city. As stated before, two significant sources of variation exist between each city. One is the monthly cost of housing, two is the monthly cost of commuting. In this example, Atascadero's cost of housing index is 148. The standard cost of housing index is 100, and the national average cost of housing is 965. The multiplication factor of 1.48 is obtained by dividing 148 by 100. Multiplying this number by the national average cost of housing gives us the cost of housing in Atascadero, which is equal to 1,428. In this example, in order to calculate the monthly cost of commuting, the distance from Atascadero to Cal Poly, round trip, is 34.2 miles. The type of vehicle we'll use is a small sedan, which costs 46 cents per mile. The number of commutes per week is 5. Assuming 4 weeks in a month, the number of commutes per month is 20. The cost per commute is equal to the distance traveled times the cost per mile, which is equal to $15.87. Multiplying this by 20, we obtain a total monthly cost of commuting from Atascadero to Cal Poly of $322. The first step I took in creating the Access Database program was to input the data into the database tables. The first table contains type of car and the operating cost per mile based on the type of car. The second table contains each of the cities, their corresponding round-trip distances to Cal Poly, as well as the individual housing costs, which are calculated using the housing cost index. The second step taken was to design and develop the form that was used for users to input personal data. They were first asked to input a city, as well as the type of vehicle they're driving, and finally the number of commutes per week made to Cal Poly. The third step was to design a query to calculate both the monthly commute cost and the monthly housing cost. The query utilized the user input data as well as the table data to display the average costs on the form seen above. After inputting the requested data, the program is able to calculate the average monthly transportation cost, the average monthly housing cost, and the total cost. In Atascadero, with a small sedan, commuting 5 times per week, the transportation cost is $322 per month. The housing cost is $1,669.45 per month, coming to a total of $1,991.45 total cost per month. The query shown here contains the cost of living in and commuting from each of the cities in a small sedan 5 times per week. The findings were that the cost of living in Arroyo Grande and Morro Bay are on average greater than the cost of living in San Luis Obispo. Paso Robles, with a round-trip commute of 59 miles, is nearly equal to the cost of living in San Luis Obispo. These results were found using the least expensive type of vehicle, meaning if the person was driving a large sedan or an SUV, they would get even higher commute costs and a resulting higher total cost. In addition to the financial factors, there are several other considerations that influence where people choose to live. Among them are time spent commuting, the convenience of living in close proximity to the workplace, as well as access to nearby stores and restaurants. Additionally, there's a drastic environmental impact that results solely from commuting Americans. Driving alone to and from work each day is a way of life that cannot be sustained forever. To help these problems, many people are choosing to carpool and use public transportation. The result of this is a reduced negative environmental impact as well as a greatly reduced cost of living.